Let's talk about something a lot of guys experience in dating, and I mean a lot. And rarely they name it out loud, and that is feeling violated. Not in some dramatic way, just more like in a disrespectful way. Being talked over, feeling used, feeling strung along, pushed past your comfort. Really, that's what's going on. If this keeps happening to you, it's not because you're unlucky, and it's not because women are jerks or because women are horrible. Most of the time, if not all of the time, it's because your boundaries aren't clear, either to them or to you. And if they're not clear to you, then it's difficult to articulate to her what your boundaries are. Being violated in dating usually starts small. You ignore a comment that rubs you the wrong way, you go along with plans you don't actually want. You tolerate behavior that makes you uncomfortable because you don't want to seem difficult or lose the connection. And every time you do that, you teach her something about you. You teach her how far she can go. And not in a bad way for her, because if you keep going along with everything, she says, well, fine, I'll keep pushing and pushing because he seems fine with everything. And here's an example. Someone cancels plans last minute. Again, she doesn't really apologize. She just assumes you'll be fine with it. And what do? You do nothing. You just laugh it off. Or immediately say, okay, fine, I'll reschedule. The message to her is clear. Your time is really flexible and your boundaries are negotiable. That's a problem. That's how violations start, not with aggression, but with silence. Another common one is emotional overreach. She vents to you constantly, leans on you for attention or validation, but she doesn't give much back. And you feel drained, but you stay because you don't want to seem cold or distant. Over time, the dynamic becomes very one sided and you end up feeling used. It happens to the best of us. That's not bad luck. That's a missing boundary, a boundary that you didn't set. Here's the part guys get wrong. Setting boundaries is not about controlling others. It's not about controlling her. It's not about controlling your girlfriend or whatever. That's not what it's about. It's about controlling your own participation in whatever is going on. It's about deciding what you're available for and what you're not available for and acting accordingly. Boundaries don't require long explanations. They don't. They don't require anger. Most of the time, they're really quiet. They sound like, quote unquote, that doesn't work for me, or I'm not comfortable with that. Very simple. Or just simply choosing not to continue in the interaction at all if it feels off. And yes, sometimes women will push back. Sure, they will test you, of course. But you should maintain, what they call your frame, who you are. Be unbothered by it. And she will push back not because your boundary is unreasonable, but because, she benefited from you not having one. You know what I'm saying? If you have a boundary, then, well, she can test it and eventually she'll walk up to the boundary and you say, well, you can go as far as here and that's that. But if you don't have that boundary and she keeps crossing one that she doesn't know about and suddenly you have that boundary, she'll keep pushing to figure out if you'll allow her to step over that boundary, the boundary that wasn't there before, at least it wasn't clear to her. And her pushing is an important signal. If she respects you less when you assert yourself, she wasn't respecting you to begin with. Very important. If she respects you less when you assert yourself, she wasn't respecting you in the first place. A lot of guys confuse boundaries with ego. They think standing up for yourself means being confrontational, being aggressive, being the alpha loud guy in the room. That's not what it is about. Real boundaries are just calm. They're enforced through action. not through arguments. It's just a boundary that you have, and that's that. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to convince her to treat you well. You just stop engaging with her if she doesn't. And, treats you well, you know, in terms of your boundaries. If she keeps trying to step over your boundaries, then she doesn't treat you well, whatever the boundary is. And whether a boundary is unreasonable, that's up to someone else to decide if that person thinks it's unreasonable. If you think the boundary is a good boundary for you, that's perfectly fine. Doesn't really matter what someone else thinks of your boundaries. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If you're afraid to lose her by setting a boundary, by setting, a standard, you've already lost yourself in the dynamic. That's usually when the violations happen most. Dating gets much simpler when you internalize this. You don't try to manage how others behave, you pay attention to how you feel and how you respond. Discomfort becomes information, and it's not something that you should suppress either. When you do that consistently, something will change. Women either adjust their behavior or they remove themselves. Both outcomes are wins. Either you get women that, are okay with your boundaries, that respect your boundaries, and if they don't, then you don't want those women in your life anyway. So you're winning regardless. So, if you've been feeling violated, disrespected, or taken for granted in dating, don't ask how to make her stop. Ask where you stopped protecting yourself. Ask where you stopped protecting yourself. Because that moment you take your boundaries seriously, she will start taking you seriously too. So if something feels off, don't explain it away. Pay attention. Boundaries aren't walls, they're standards. Standards to be respected. And standards are how you stop being violated. So that's that. Hope it's useful, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye bye.